This is the Podcast Digest. You heard him, yes, it is the Podcast Digest. It is episode 15 of the show, and welcome back. I am so happy you guys could join me for another installment of the Podcast Digest, where this week I'm getting back to talking about two great show recommendations. But before I do that, couple of quick items of business. First of all, I want to thank you for joining me. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this little tiny production I call the Podcast Digest. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for telling a friend. We've reached episode 15. The response continues to be great. Thanks for interacting on Twitter. Little milestone for the show this week. We passed 600 followers at Pod Digest, and also liking the show on Facebook. Just search for the Podcast Digest there. I really hope you guys enjoyed last week's episode with my brother Chris. It was a little different, but I think we talked about some interesting stuff, and it was really cool to have a guest on for the first time. I do plan on doing more of that in the future, especially with some podcast hosts, maybe on the episode where I review the show, or possibly going back to some of the previously reviewed shows and reaching out to some of those guests, asking them about how their show's going, and just another way for them to connect to their listeners, maybe talk about the show itself, how they came to do it, what they like about doing it, what they don't, so on and so forth. But that's all off in the future. Let's first deal with the business of today. Today, I've got two new show recommendations back to the traditional format. This will be shows number 27 and 28 so far that I have recommended here on the Podcast Digest. So seriously, if you're just joining me this week, you just found the show, or you've only listened to a handful of episodes, please check out the Podcast Digest online. That is the website is thepodcastdigest.info. All the old episodes are there, all the comments, and various other entries I make on the blog, on the website. They are kind of talking about the show itself. There'll be more of those to come in the future. So go back, start with episode 1, work through the catalog, and find out really about a way to flesh out all of your subscription list. Guarantee if you subscribe to every single show that I have recommended, you will have an amazing list of shows each and every week in your podcast app. So let's begin with the opening section, the discussion section. I call it the listener pro tip. Let's talk about this particular subject. We haven't had this subject come up yet, and I got a question the other day on Twitter that made me start thinking that this would be a good time to cover this one. And this conversation will be on listening speed. What speed do I listen to shows on? Well, I'll get to that in just a second, but let's talk about changing the speed of a show while you're listening to it. Many of the popular podcast apps, maybe all of them really, do feature the ability to change the speed that you listen to. Now, why would you want to do this exactly? Well, first is some folks may feel that a host or hosts speak too slowly, and that maybe listening at 1.2x, 1.5x, or even double speed, and may make the show more listenable. The other big reason, of course, is consumption. Obviously, the shorter time it takes you to listen to a show, the more shows you can listen to. And of course, that's something I advocate here, is to listen to as many podcasts as you possibly can. In fact, there's one popular application I've touched on before, and I'm sure many of you have heard about it, for iOS called Overcast, done by developer Marco Arment. He takes a slightly different approach with this and tries to dynamically speed up only the dead air spots. So right now would actually be sped up. And so rather than making the voice themselves quicker throughout, it will actually take those dead air spots like this and actually cut them out or trim them up or speed them up. So that too is a way of actually saving listening time. Now, I've played with Overcast. I've played with the variable speed playback rate, if you will, variable speed on a lot of the Pocket Cast is what I use. They have a change. So does Apple's iOS podcast app and any of the Downcast, all a number of different applications I've used. I've tried them out, tried different speeds, tried the smart speed in Overcast, and I have come to a conclusion. I don't really like any of them. Okay. I like to listen to the shows the way the hosts intended them. They sound much more normal to me. They sound more like a regular conversation with somebody, like if you're in the room. If you're talking to somebody on the phone or you're talking with them in person in the same room with them, clearly you have no ability to speed up their language, their talk. And so anytime any of these speed changes, I fiddle with them because, I do find that the host either speaks slowly or that I am trying to save some time and work through some, build up in my playlist. Every time I try to flip that switch, it never comes off sounding just quite right. But I want to know what you think. Let me know on Twitter at Pod Digest. Let me know by either commenting on the post, the Podcast Digest. .info.com, podcastdigest.info, the website, or anyway, shoot me an email. The email account for the show is thepodcastdigest@gmail.com. Kind of like to take a little poll here and ask all of you, do you listen to this show at a faster speed? Do I talk too slowly for you? If so, some of the hosts I've heard will do this. Then they'll start talking really fast like this, and then this will sound pretty funny, and I won't do a whole episode like that. But I'd be curious to know what speed do you like to listen to this show at, or some of the other shows I've recommended. Do you prefer the normal speed because it feels more natural and the pauses are done with purpose? Or do you want to just kind of consume as quickly as you can and make that 30-minute episode feel like 20 or 15 or whatever speed you're listening to? Let me know. So let's get into this week's show with our show recommendations. I mentioned before I am back with 2 great shows, and I'm going back to my roots, so to speak. I have talked about in previous episodes, I do shows big and small, independent and major label, if you will. This week's show, I have 2, and both of them are of the smaller independent variety, and that certainly does not make them lesser candidates on my all-star cast of show recommendations here on the Podcast Digest. But they are sort of smaller and independent, and I'm happy to highlight these 2 shows. So show 1 this week is one that I've been listening to. I found almost as soon as I started the Podcast Digest back in the end of August of this year and first part of September. Came across these guys pretty early, and I've been listening weekly ever since. It's this show and the other one I'm talking to, I did not go back. I just sort of subscribed as I found them. I like them. I kept listening to them and decided that I would end up doing a feature on them, a review on them as I am today, sort of when I'd consumed enough episodes so that I feel like I could talk about it fairly confidently. So the first show is one called iOS Docked. That's iOS DOCKED. That is also their Twitter handle, and iOSdocked.net is the website. They do have 4 hosts, Joe, Clay, Jerry, and Danny. All of them are on Twitter. Joe is at Apollo4090. Clay is at Clay Russell, Jerry is at JN Gold, and Danny is at DMTAMMARO. At the time of this recording, iOS Doc has been around for 79 episodes, and as you can tell clearly from the title, it is a weekly iOS-based podcast. So what sets this show apart from others? Well, this is what I call a show for and by the everyman. It's literally a group of guys talking iOS, Apple, iPhones, iPads, Mac every week, combining the iOS news that has occurred since the last show, and also to share their personal take and stories about their Apple-related tech. Everyone knows, as I've said many times on the show, I am a fan of Apple. I am an iPhone owner, an iPad user, and a MacBook Air user as well, both for my DJing and for my podcast recording. So I really do get into the iOS and mobile tech featured shows. And iOS Doc brings something to the table that no other show does, and that is a much more realistic point of view, because these are not necessarily your tech reporters, your pundits, your people who live in the industry. They are just clearly really passionate fans. And what's also cool is that the hosts on the show definitely have their own personality. They tend to come from different backgrounds, it seems, but they've all united over this common love of the iOS. And so, but these varied hosts kind of brings a nice wide spectrum and point of views and takes on the iOS world. The one thing that I think really makes this show stand out more than anything else is that it's clear with iOS Doc, these guys really do their research. Check out the show notes. Okay, if you are an iOS fan and do end up subscribing to iOS Doc, go back to any of the previous episodes and look at the work that is put in these show notes and link collecting, and it's all right there in your podcast app right there. It's obviously a ton of work, and I appreciate it as a fan of their show. And the show notes and the work that they put in is really not something that gets enough attention, myself included. My show notes are very minimal, but the links to my shows that'll be out there are obviously included, but these guys really put in the effort. So they have several segments on the show. A lot of them are recurring week to week. They've got some neat little titles that they call each one, but one that really I always find interesting, and it's usually at the open of the show, called their Game Setter Challenge. They've picked a new iOS game each week, and each of the hosts, along with their listeners, will be playing it, trying to achieve the high score. It's often hilarious here, the competition back and forth between each other, and obviously a lot of verbal barbs are thrown, and it is a neat way to kind of get some listener engagement. It's a wonderful tool that they've got, and I really appreciate that segment each week. One thing I probably need to mention about iOS Docked, they do sometimes struggle a bit with the occasional sound quality issue. But as I've mentioned before with shows with multiple hosts via Skype, getting this problem under wraps isn't easy. And I know from a few conversations I've had with the hosts online on Twitter that it is something that they're aware of, and it is something that they want to improve. So I did not want to not talk about them because of that. I think it's a minor issue, and it is not drastic in any way, shape, or form, but it is something that you will hear as you work through the back catalog of iOS Docked. I really think that the show content, the density of information, the relatableness of the hosts, the fully researched conversations, the really entertaining recurring segments, all trump any type of minor sound quality quabbles I may have with them. Like I said, I think all the pros definitely outweigh that one small negative. It really is a great iOS podcast. If you're an Apple fan like me, this is one you need to have on your subscription list. I guarantee you that you will enjoy it. And actually, I need to mention, as I was assembling these notes for this episode, actually I listened to the very last one, episode 79, and they made an announcement on that one that kind of sucks, actually. They're moving to a monthly show as they're moving into a slower period of time for Apple and Apple-related news. So the show is actually going to drop from its current weekly release schedule to monthly. So that's unfortunate, but it is something that you can obviously add to your subscription list. It won't bog down. You won't miss episodes if they are putting out one just once a month. I'm sure that the impact of each individual show will be that tighter, cleaner, and more worth the listen as they come out monthly. They actually have a handful of podcasts. They are part of a website that actually links together a number of different shows. It's not a network per se, but they do have other shows. I know the Apple Juice Cast is one they just released, and the Tech Talk podcast is another monthly show. So I imagine they're just kind of releasing, syncing up the release schedules with their other productions as well. But, I'm hoping that they do go back. They did talk about going to a more regular release schedule, more frequent release schedule as the Apple news increases, as the the product cycle starts to get more releases and so on and so forth. So I'm a fan. So I hope that they do go back to more frequent releases. And if you subscribe to the show and like it, check out those hosts, Joe, Clay, Jerry, Danny. Let them know on Twitter. Just go ahead and rewind the podcast here. I gave out those Twitter names as well, and I will be having them in the show notes, as I mentioned. iOS Docked, the first show recommendation this week on the Podcast Digest. And now to our second show recommendation, another great show who I've been talking to a lot lately. It's called Moving the Needle. They are also another ensemble cast with their hosts, anywhere from 3 to 5. Given the week, it's Sean, Roy, Meg, Dave, and Bayleigh. Then they've all got at MTN Pod email addresses in terms of their contact information. Check the show notes for those emails if you want to reach out to one of those hosts. But these guys have recently sort of expanded their reach of their show, what they go after, what they talk about. It started as a movie podcast, but they go from movies now to television, to news, to music, and even books. The concept is this week, what's moving their needle, if you will? What's kind of drawing an impact? What do they find as something as interesting or fun or entertaining or whatever the case may be? It's a really cool show. The concept is unique. I think it's a spin on an ensemble pop culture comedy, if you will, podcast, and they kind of go in all different areas, not just movies. And they've really got a great website. I need to mention the website. The website is mtnpod.com. I don't usually highlight a show's website this much, but seriously, it's one of the better ones I've seen in all these podcasts I've looked at. So if nothing else, hop on over there. You could do that from your phone right now. Pick it up, mtnpod.com, and you could really see what I'm talking about. And the production quality and the information presented in Moving the Needle is on par with this website. Sean and Roy are sort of the main hosts each week, if you will, but they also have Meg, Bayleigh, and Dave, as I mentioned. Each of them has that unique point of view, something I always like when I hear multiple hosts on a podcast. I like that the fact that they're not exactly the same, so to speak, and they've got really unique opinions and takes. As I said, this was a show I had found when I first started the podcast digest. I've been an avid listener since. It's sort of, as I said, lives in a crowded field of pop culture-based podcasts, but their format and their expansion of sort of moving from movies to a much wider breadth really makes this a unique one to subscribe to. They covered things like mob movies was an episode, guilty song pleasures. One of the recent ones was best and worst on-screen chemistry. And so it's a different way of talking about some of the entertainment and pop culture things, and I think you'll like it. I really do. I think the hosts are really likable, and I've spoke with a couple of them before on Twitter, and some of them do come from a movie and film background. So that's an interesting. It makes what they're discussing that much more valuable in terms of their opinion and take. They go around the table. They kind of each do their research. So when I talk about, mob movies or on-screen chemistry, they've all kind of pre-selected, pre-researched their takes, and one will throw out their take on something, once moving their needle, if you will, and then they go around round table style, and each of them sort of says if they agree or disagree or why. It's really a great conversation starter, and these episodes, I feel, they typically run, 45 minutes to an hour, give or take, but I really feel like it could go much, much longer. I feel like if you were in the room with them, this is kind of one of these like all Saturday night long talks, given some of the subjects that they've got, and it's really a great show that will make you come out of it and want to go find that movie, want to, what was that book they were talking about, and look it up in Kindle, or it might want you to check out a show. The other day on one of their episodes, they were talking about Two Broke Girls. I believe it was Bayleigh who was recommending it. It may have been Meg. And honestly, I'd never watched the show at all, but it was spoken about so highly that it makes me want to go out and say, maybe I do need to check this out. I've talked about this with other shows as well. If a podcast makes me come away and want me to take action, wants me to go find this, listen to this, buy that, watch this, that to me is a sign of a great podcast. That's what all of us, I think, aim for in some way, shape, or form. There's a goal with the podcast that they're looking to achieve. If it's only to entertain you, but when it goes beyond that, it entertains you and you enjoy spending your time with that show, but then it's something you want to go out and do after that. I mean, to me, it's a hallmark of one of the best shows. And I hope that that's something I've accomplished here on the Podcast Digest. I hope when I talk about these great shows like iOS Docked and Moving the Needle this week, that you want to go into the search field on your podcast app, put them in, and find, oh, yeah, this is great, and allows you to start listening to other great shows on that web. Moving the Needle will also always hold a special place in my heart, so to speak. Roy reached out to me, one of the hosts, and I believe this week they will be featuring an interview that Roy did with me about the Podcast Digest. So you should be seeing that on Twitter as well as the website, thepodcastdigest.info, and I will put up a post and make an announcement when that show goes live. So I want to thank Roy, and I want to thank Moving the Needle for giving the Podcast Digest a little attention in some of their time, and figuring that a conversation with me about this show would be worthy, and including on the Moving the Needle show list. So thank you guys very much for that. I am eternally grateful. So those are our 2 show recommendations this week, guys. What'd you think? iOS Docked and Moving the Needle. Check them out. Subscribe to them. Let me know what you think of this show. Please follow me on Twitter. If you're not already doing so, I know many of you are, at Pod Digest. If you already are, tell a friend. If you know somebody that you follow that isn't following the show and you know they like podcasts, I really would love for them to check out the show. They can follow me at Pod Digest. Put the Podcast Digest in their search bar on Facebook. All the announcements and information goes out as there as well. And if you want to check out any of the old episodes, make sure you go to the podcastdigest.info, as I've been telling you all along. Also, reviews, always great and appreciated. On iTunes and on Stitcher are 2 of the best places to do that. It really does help other people find the show and helps us expose more folks to the Podcast Digest and all of these great shows that we are talking about. If you've got a show that I've not yet talked about on the show, obviously now I'm up to 28 shows that I've talked about here on the Podcast Digest. There are hundreds of thousands of podcasts. Let me know. Shoot me a message. Send me an email. Say, hey, look, I really like your show recommendations, if you do. And say, I also think you'd like this one, and I think your listeners would like this one, and they need to hear about this one. I'm always looking for great show recommendations. I can't do them all, obviously. Many of you have sent them along, and I've not yet reviewed them. Obviously, they do kind of stack up for a while there, so I appreciate your patience if you have submitted one to me. But don't stop doing so. Let me know, because I may very well hit onto something that I get really enthusiastic about and I want to make a part of my next episode. Speaking of which, the next episode, it is scheduled for next week. It may arrive early or late. We will have to see. I do have a DJ function next Saturday, and so I hesitate to commit myself to the day after, as I like to relax, spend time with my family after a long Saturday behind the table. But so I may go a few days early, or it may be on the Monday following, but we will see. We will see. Either way, I thank you for joining me this week. I hope you will join me next week. This is Dan Lizette with the Podcast Digest. Till next time, take care.